Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Phenomenon, a paranormal podcast. And I'm Christina.
This is Anthony. Welcome to episode 4 of the podcast, guys.
Yes, and it's been great, actually. We've had a lot of new listeners this week, and we've enjoyed doing it, and hope everyone can help spread the word and keep coming back to listen to all our stories of the paranormal and whatnot.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and we hope you guys will subscribe and leave us a review if you guys enjoyed this. We really appreciate any help that you can provide, and if you have any stories you want to share with us, photos, images, audio clips, what have you, anything you want to share with us, feel free to contact us on social media or through our email address, and maybe you guys can be featured on the show in a new episode.
Yeah, that's always exciting because we have had some people contact us in that respect, so we're looking forward to sharing others' stories as well.
We'll have more about that later on in the episode.
Exactly.
But we have an exciting one for you guys this week.
Oh, yeah.
We mentioned it last week, but this week we're going to discuss a very popular hotspot for paranormal activity in San Francisco.
Right.
Something that it's got quite a history to it. Very unique. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not, but there's a location that is now just ruins, but it's the Sutro baths.
Right, and it's interesting enough that we have ruins, actual ruins in California, which you don't necessarily associate California with a ruin site.
Yeah.
But once we tell a story, it'll make a lot more sense. It is on the west side of San Francisco, but these are stone ruins of the Sutro baths, and the Sutro baths was once the largest indoor swimming establishment in the world.
Yeah, it was the biggest one in the world at the time, and quite historic in its building, especially because of its location on the cliffs near the ocean in this area. They actually used the ocean water to pump water into their pools, and the natural flow of the waves would actually create the movement of the water.
Right, and it came through this tunnel system, right?
Yeah, really, and this is, again, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but the tunnels are a big part of the modern day paranormal activity going on right now, but those tunnels still exist. You can actually go to those tunnels. They survived. Whether or not
you should or not remains in question.
That's one of the things, but
well, now, to get an idea of the size of this place, they could accommodate up to 10,000 people. It was the size of it was 7 pools.
Yeah.
And they also had a big theater that could seat up to 6,000 people, I believe, and a museum. So this was a huge place, and it was opened in the late 1800s, I believe, 1896.
Yeah, it had 1896 was a good year for that. There was lots of slides, springboards, trapezes, and even a high dive for the public to enjoy at the time. One of the interesting things about this was, as Christina mentioned, that there was a museum there. That's because the man who built this place, Adolf Sutro, was also well known for collecting artifacts around the world and was interested in not only providing entertainment, but education to those who came to his buildings. And so he built a massive museum at the entrance near the baths so that people would learn and grow as they were going to the pools.
Yeah, and if you can imagine back in the day, in those times, I mean, as Anthony said, this place was a modern marvel of sorts for them. This is, a place where you can go and get some education. You could see artifacts. You could go swimming. It was, they had a theater. This was really just, a hotspot destination. And when it did finally open, people came in droves. I mean, they were not lacking anyone who wanted to come in and really make this what he had dreamed it would be.
He even created a Greek portal at the entrance to these pools that would transport people inside of a massive glass enclosure to these 7 pools that he built. What's interesting is the water that he used from the Pacific Ocean during high tide could fill about 1.7 million gallons of water for all the pools in just 1 hour.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's a lot of water, and that's a lot of engineering on his part. Like Christina said, up to 10,000 people at one time, and offered 20,000 bathing suits and 40,000 towels for rent.
Yeah, I can't even imagine the investment it must have taken to put this place together.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of interesting things here that contribute to the mystery and mystique about this place. And, we mentioned a lot of people came. The problem was not a lot of people wanted to return.
This is an interesting note here, going forward. This stuff that we're going to be reporting was already happening when the place was built. So this is not something that just started happening later on after the baths were done.
Right.
This has been going on since its construction. Interesting of note, too, real quick, about the museum that he built. He featured sculptures, paintings, tapestries, and artifacts from Mexico, China, Asia, and the Middle East, and included what we now know are the popular Egyptian mummies that are on display.
Right.
So the mummies that you have to go to Egypt for to view and to see in their glory, Sutro brought to San Francisco in the late 1800s.
Exactly.
For a public swimming area.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that every single artifact that someone might bring from somewhere, from their travels, or every single mummified corpse brings with it a curse.
I don't think the mummy was walking around at night, looking for people. I mean,
exactly,
It's just interesting to note the history that he brought to the place.
Well, true, and I will say this. While I'm not going to say every single thing like that brings a curse, I'm also not going to say that he couldn't have brought something to the location that had some sort of significance or any kind of negative energy attached to it. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and say what a lot of paranormal, quote-unquote, investigators will come out and say and automatically call out demon.
No.
Because that's not who I am. But again, I do believe that negative energy exists. So, who knows what it was, but here are just a couple of comments from people that couldn't really pin down why they didn't want to return to the Sutro baths. But, someone said it's just a little spooky. Well, actually, a lot of people said that. They would go there excited, wanted to take in the whole experience, but then just couldn't shake this feeling that they had that it was just spooky.
Yeah.
Another one, someone said it just feels strange here. So, there was that, like Anthony said, from the outset. It didn't take years for people to feel this way or major accidents. This was happening on day one.
Yeah. And, not just day one, but over the years, a lot of people have come here after the fact because of all the initial claims of paranormal activity here.
Right.
And again, this is all depending on what you personally believe, but there are a lot of psychics who have gone to the area, claiming that there's an unnerving force flowing through the area itself, not just the baths, the area itself, the land.
Exactly. Which we're going to get to the land ties in a minute.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of people, even paranormal investigators, have gone there, saying that not only do some of the relics carry some sort of significance, but that there may be spirits and energy from different cultures around the world.
Right.
They call it a multicultural smorgasbord of horror, which is not exactly the most inviting name.
No. But it's also, that's like a little, of the fear factor thing we've talked about, the paranormal. Well, you can't have paranormal without having fear and being terrified of this, that, or the other thing. So, again, that's a very catchy way to put things.
Yeah.
But, there are a lot of things that are happening here that, first, I think we need to tell you how this became a ruin.
Yeah.
So, people would say that the baths seemed cursed. Mm-hmm. There were any number of maintenance and construction problems with the project in and of itself.
Yeah.
The Great Depression hit, which pretty much sealed the fate that without having a lot of returning visitors, now you have the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And it ended up just not being able to function and continue on. They had owners of it that hung on as long as they could until the 1960s. And they decided to tear it all down and build condos.
And even, I think, decided to make an ice rink out of it.
At one point,
and
right.
it just didn't work. It failed. So, yeah, like in the 1960s, the area was sold to developers, land developers.
Right.
And they made plans to replace the baths that were built there with high-rise apartments and began demolition of the structure.
Probably not the wisest idea, as it turns out.
Yeah, what happened a couple years later?
Well, they all burned down.
Yeah, exactly.
They just burned straight down. A mysterious and catastrophic fire broke out at the very beginning of their construction project. You know, without getting too dramatic, I guess, it just doesn't seem like something wanted anything built on this land.
Yeah.
You know, even though they did build the Sutro baths on this land, they had a ton of problems getting to the point of opening.
It seems like, you know, and again, I'm not saying it's evil. I don't think there's anything necessarily evil per se in the area. I think that there's some sort of energy there that maybe just doesn't want humans around.
Right.
Maybe doesn't want people getting so close to it.
Exactly. I mean, when this happened, they could not find a cause of the fire. The owners of the land, that, you know, the ones who were going to build the condos, they finally just had enough of the failures that kept happening, and they abandoned it. They just abandoned the project, probably lost a lot of money.
The city actually made it a part of the Golden Gate National Reserve.
Right.
So it's there, it's done. There's no building on it. There's no construction. It's a national landmark area now. Well,
now it stands as burned out ruins. That's all it is, really. But it actually, it's crumbling still. I mean, this is a broken down, crumbling ruin. Yeah. But there is still enough of an interest in it to where people are coming, and there's reasons for that. We're going to start talking about hauntings at the Sutro baths. So do you want to go down that road?
Ooh, do I ever?
Okay, you go for it.
Let's go here. You know, like we said, there's a lot of people who have said from the very beginning that they felt some sort of presence there.
Right.
You know, interesting enough, modern day people who go to investigate this area, because it's actually a public landmark. You can go if you want to this area. It's not off limits.
Which is something that sometimes is very rare in the paranormal field, really.
Yeah,
it's about asking for permission to do this, that, and the other thing.
You usually are either kicked off the land or you have to go get permission to go investigate, but this is public property.
Exactly.
And a lot of investigators do make the claim that they see people who used to go to the baths still there.
Oh, yeah.
But that's interesting because the people back then were seeing stuff as well.
Right.
So it begs the question, are people now seeing some sort of ghost or entity, or is the energy there some sort of thin barrier, some thin layer between time?
Well, because it's not as if the people, and this is something that we have talked about, we'll talk about more.
Yeah.
It's not as if the people that went to the Sutro baths, like there were a lot of deaths attributed to swimmers going to this Sutro.
No.
You know, so you can't sit there and say, oh, well, it's the ghosts of people who died at Sutro.
Yeah, no, so many people drown. There were no drownings there.
Not the case. And so people tend to think, okay, the only spirits that haunt a place are ones who were there, ones who live there, whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that that's the case in what we have experienced ourselves when we have done our own investigating, when we've done spirit box sessions. We're not only getting communication with people who lived on the premises.
Yeah.
In fact, it's quite, I think, the opposite. We're getting a lot from, people all over. Yeah. So I don't really think energy is harnessed to one specific location. That being said, is it that it's almost like it retained the energy that was there when it was active, and it's almost like much like a residual haunting, like it's playing it over and over again.
Yeah.
And especially if those people who had visited back then are now no longer there. We don't really know how all this works, right? I mean, no one, I don't think, can really say that they know exactly how the afterlife works.
Yeah.
So, sorry, not to interrupt you. Go on.
No. I mean, that's about the main claim nowadays
Right.
for ghost activity is they're seeing a lot of people who used to go there,
Right.
but there's also, spirits who aren't always necessarily people
Right.
seen there. I mean, it really depends on who you ask, because there's been a lot of different reports, but there are people who claim they've seen Irish banshees there.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
To the South African Tokolash hiding in the dark of the ruins.
And what is the Tokolash?
I haven't done enough extensive research on it. I would have to do more. Let me see. In Zulu Xhosa mythology,
Okay.
and again, if I'm mispronouncing anything, let me know, everyone. Basically, it's a dwarf-like water spirit,
Okay.
or a sprite.
Right.
It's considered mischievous and evil, and can become invisible by drinking water.
Interesting.
Usually called upon by malevolent people to cause trouble for others.
Okay.
That
Okay.
was interesting to me of note, because of something else we'll talk about later. But some of our research into the area has shown that it's not just paranormal that you have to worry about, but people.
Exactly.
So we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But just keep that in mind
All right.
when you think of the Tokolash.
Right.
Another thing of note is not just ghosts that are seen here. As we mentioned earlier, their tunnels are a major source of interest to investigators. That's because of a very mysterious creature that has been reported in the underground tunnels.
Right.
I mean, these tunnels at the time when they were built were considered an engineering marvel. Like, people couldn't believe how Sutro built these baths and the tunnels that fed the water from the ocean into the baths to begin with.
Right.
It would be pumped in from the Pacific Ocean using the tides to provide the pressure in the pools. So, after it was abandoned, people would go down there to look at the place, investigate, and they started seeing some unidentifiable claw marks appearing on the walls of the tunnel system. They started hearing strange noises and footsteps coming up from behind them in the tunnels. However, there are no ocean creatures in San Francisco, at least in the Bay Area, that should be able to walk on clawed feet out of the ocean.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the thing. They also say that there are no ocean creatures who can walk up out of the ocean and start arranging neat piles of bones and fur in the tunnels. So people are finding piles of neatly constructed bones and fur from animals in the tunnel system.
Well, the way it sounds like something is nesting there.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when, aside from bones, they're actually finding rotting carcasses of animals and fish and everything in this, for lack of a better word, lair
It's
sort of area.
unsettling.
Right.
I mean, if you're visiting the area and you see, blood and carcasses and bones and fur and claw marks, your instinct to say there's a monster here.
Right, of course.
I mean, again, for us, looking at it from a broader perspective, I think it's maybe some sort of creature, an animal.
Right.
Maybe one that's not identified yet.
There are plenty of those. Sure.
We know all about cryptids. I mean, we just had 2 episodes talking about the Yucca Man.
Right.
So California itself is not unknown to cryptid sightings.
Right,
So
of course.
who knows what could be living in this area? Could it be part ocean dwelling, part,
Right.
land?
Well,
Which is interesting to me, because their area itself does have a lot of history with Native American lore.
it does, and that kind of leads me, I'm going to let you get into the Native American history, but another thing about these bones sometimes was that it wasn't just that there were bones and carcasses left behind, but sometimes it appeared that the bones were arranged in very specific designs
Yeah.
that could lead you to believe that, well, maybe there might be humans there.
Well, that's the thing. Before I get into the Native American lore, let's talk about that real quick, because there are a lot of claims from people who have gone to this area that they have witnessed the actions of a satanic cult.
Right.
If, for those of you who don't know your history with cult activity, Anton LaVey founded the Church of Satan in the so-called Black House not too far from the Sutro Baths. So
coincidentally,
the Church of Satan was founded very close to the Sutro Baths.
right?
The Sutro Baths, since it's the fire broke out and now they're ruins. It's long been rumored that they're a meeting place for the Church of Satan, especially the elders and the people who, whatever they do there.
Well, it would make a little sense just in the thought that people, like, back when this was popular, when the Church of Satan came about, them meeting at the Black House and whatnot, it went on for a time, but then the more these things are, put in the media, now with media being everywhere, they might want to be a little more inconspicuous to their activities, and, having a place that's nearby, especially, to, go and meet, out of, the world view, would not be out of the realm of reality, really.
And like we said at the beginning of this podcast, when we started the podcast, we don't judge anyone's personal belief systems. We know that there are different branches of the so-called Church of Satan that are not actually worshiping Satan. They have just different belief systems that aren't classified by, Christianity or, Buddhism, Muslim, whatever you decide to practice. So we're not judging anyone's belief systems here. We're talking not about a belief system. We're talking about the actual cult that was started back in the day.
Right.
And that could still very well exist to this day, who perform some not so nice things, in the shadows.
Right.
The people who have actually come across these rituals being performed have seen seances.
Right.
Rituals designed to bring forth malevolent spirits or even animal sacrifices. This was back in the 1970s where a lot of these claims were coming from.
Well, that's an active point in time for the Church of Satan as well.
It's about a decade after the fires happened.
Right.
So one of the interesting things about the tunnels is sometimes people will stumble upon the remains of these rituals, and they'll find drawings of pentagrams on the tunnel walls. And even to this day of 2020, some members of the cult still practice dark magic in the tunnels of the Sutro Baths. And even if they don't, the cult seems to have caused enough trouble on the spiritual plane, according to some witnesses. So they think, according to some people, that the actions of the cult, whatever it was they were doing back in the 70s and even to today,
right,
caused enough, spiritual turmoil to make the place as active as it is today, and maybe even to draw some things towards it.
Right.
Again, it's all about what you believe or choose to believe or don't. But it's become a very large local legend, and they say if you carry a lit candle to the very end of the tunnels, some sort of invisible force will grab the candle from your hands and throw it in the water. Not just knock it out of your hands, it'll physically grab it out of your hands and throw it.
And that leaves you in total darkness in the tunnels.
With all these claw marks and bones. And
to say the least, that would be a little unsettling.
Yeah.
They do say that, if you do find yourself in the tunnels, and if you happen to come across, let's say, humans that are down there, that are, even if they are, doing rituals down there, not knowing what other people's intentions are is important to mention. Because there are, people who may practice, let's say if you're Wiccan or pagan in general, and they may practice rituals. That's not to say that anyone who practices any sort of ritual is a bad person in any way.
No.
The thing is, you don't know who you're dealing with and what their intentions are.
Yeah, it's all about intention.
Exactly. So the best thing to do is go the other way.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're walking into, especially in a very dimly lit tunnel in an area that is known for some negative activity.
Just don't engage, that's all. Exactly. I mean, if they're not there to harm you, then there's no fear.
Right.
But intruding upon whatever they're doing is not going to do anyone any good. Just, again, a broad thing to put out there, but let's not jump to conclusions about things we don't understand.
Exactly.
Again, there are bad people in the world who have bad intentions, and so things of bad intentions will cause negative energy. But like we said, there are plenty of good people who decide that they believe in practicing magic or rituals, who put good intentions out into the world.
Right.
Whether you believe that works or not is up to you, but that doesn't mean that they are involved with quote-unquote Satan or demons or what have you.
Well, it's really the same principle as ghosts and spirits in general.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be scary.
Yeah.
Not everything in the paranormal realm should be frightening, and the more that's pumped up in the media, the harder it is to see the other side. So, we have to just keep a level head in these things, and
it's about separating fact from fiction,
right?
Because I can tell you as a writer myself, there is a lot of entertainment value for audiences in having the scary and fear contributed to things like ghosts and monsters and stuff. But you have to separate the fiction from what the everyday reality tells you. And the reality is, not everything that's strange or unknown is something to fear.
Exactly.
Sometimes it could be something really great, something amazing. It's not like Christina said, it's all about intention. Whoever is doing whatever, it's all about whatever intention they're putting into it. So you have to not make a snap judgment about it. And if you just don't understand it and don't want to deal with it, just walk away.
Yeah, practice everything with safety in mind. That's all. And just worrying about, if you're going to go visit a place, and a lot of people now like, to visit abandoned places, let's say, we always talk about the fact that, you don't know who's squatting anywhere that you may go. We have a very notorious abandoned location very close to us. It's very government regulated. And people will sneak in there quite often to go investigate the paranormal. Do we want to go investigate this place? Oh my gosh, would love to. However, there have been many, many accounts of this particular location having squatters that have started fires there, squatters who have tried to attack people who go to investigate. So it's wise to avoid that, even though it would be a great location to see. So that's the best advice I guess we can give is not to go into anything just blindly. Try and research and know your location, whether it's the Sutro baths and know what you're getting into in the tunnels, or if it's anywhere else, just be wise. That's all. But not to veer too far off course. We did want to talk about the Native American ties to this location.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, sometimes tragic when you think of the history of the people there. But the area in question where the Sutro baths were home to, and I want to pronounce this right, the Ohlone, Ohlone tribe. They were prominent in the land thousands of years ago. That was their area, and then of course when the European settlers arrived, actually in this area in particular was Spanish settlers.
Right.
They drove the people out, and because they was trying to stake claim to the land, there was a lot of bloody conflict, and sadly most of the people were kind of obliterated, and it's really tragic.
Too many stories like that.
Yeah, nowadays actually, since things are no longer like that as far as bloody conflict, the government has relocated many different tribes to the area. So the area in question now has not just the Ohlone, but several other Native American tribes, all kind of in this one area.
Right.
But for the area itself, if you look at the history of the land, like we said, there seems to be something with the land,
right,
as far as energy going on. Something interesting to note is the Ohlone's creation myths, because as with a lot of creation myths for Native American tribes, the coyote, the trickster, was a huge part of their creation mythology. Especially a branch of the Ohlone were the Chochino tribe. Their area of San Francisco had a cultural hero who was the grandson of the coyote, the trickster. They named him Kakunu. And he was an anthropomorphic figure who closely resembled the peregrine falcon of North America.
Okay.
That's interesting to know. So we have the coyote. The creation myth is that there was another world before ours that ended, and what was left, or what the people who came here found, was a planet that was mostly water, which, most people know our planet is 70% water. So the coyote found dry land, and after this flood that made the water of the land, he found a beautiful girl inside of, or near, a river, and she instructed him that she will be your wife in order to that people may be raised again. Okay. So that was the myth. He met this girl, had children with her, and then he had a second wife that kind of bore the people of the land.
Okay.
Later on, he had his grandson, who became Kakunu. Kakunu was part of a pretty interesting story that I think pertained to this particular story with the Sutro baths, because in their mythology, Kakunu got to a point where he didn't want to fight anymore and decided he was going to become a dove and enter the earth itself. He dived into the earth and went to confront what they called the body of stone, or Wiwi. The body of stone was the underground lord of the earth, described as a man with a stone body who fed people to his servants. What was interesting to note about this little story here was that his terrain was scattered with bones. Huh. So bones littered the land of this creature, this stone man. The body of stone held many of the Kakunu's people in captivity. So he took people.
Okay.
And they assisted Kakunu in an epic battle with the body of stone. When Kakunu shot the body of stone in the neck and navel with all arrows, the body of stone died and burst into pieces and became all the rocks scattered across the world. So that's their creation story. What's interesting to note about that is the geology of the land that the Sutro baths are on. I did a little research because something that we've talked about before is the way that not only limestone plays with paranormal activity, but that quartz plays with all sorts of activity, whether it be cryptid or what have you.
Alien.
Yeah, alien.
Right.
It turns out, billions of years ago, what we now know as the San Andreas Fault Line had an area where it was mostly quartz, believe it or not.
Of course.
This was in about a little over 5 million years ago. There were some quartzite cobbles preserved in young sedimentary rocks. The rocks they were embedded in were actually 1 billion years old at the time.
Wow.
They were transported along streams from the distant core of the North American continent. So this quartz came all the way from the center of the country.
Wow.
Along rivers to what was now known as the San Andreas Fault Line. The San Andreas Fault Line also, at this time, a few million years ago, used to have a series of volcanoes that lined the ridge that would later form the fault line that we all know now today for, its earthquakes and stuff.
Right.
The volcanoes eventually disappeared, but what's interesting to note about that is not only the quartz and limestone, but the volcanoes tend to bring about a lot of UFO activity.
Okay.
And we know from our research, a lot of areas like the Sutro baths not only have paranormal activity, but cryptids and UFOs as well.
Yeah, I mean, and this definitely fits that bill with the multitude of different types of activity people are seeing. And even when it comes to the ghost sightings, there's not just one type. I mean, there's a multitude of sites. There are, ghosts in general. There's what look like residual energy activity of the plane, the replaying of the history of the place itself. There's people hearing what sound like choirs of people singing, large crowds singing when there's nobody there. It's a lot of different types of activity, and perhaps even poltergeist with a lot of sounds and things being thrown, like in the tunnels, different things that are happening. So it's you tend to find a wide array of unusual paranormal activity at locations like this with a high quartz concentration. And also, the more that we do, the more there seems to be a lot of Native American history on the lands of the locations that we're talking about. So what is the connection? We're not here to say that we know 100% one way or the other what that connection is.
No, I mean, we have plenty of theories, but I mean, again, theories need to be tested.
Sure.
So, again, when we make claims on here, it's not claims of knowing, it's claims of thoughts and ideas.
Right.
We think could possibly be a reality.
Right.
It's up to everyone, the public, I think, to test those theories. Safely, of course. Everyone, always make sure you're safe. Never go off alone somewhere. Always make sure you're allowed on the area you're going to. And don't do anything dangerous, okay?
Right. Exactly.
Everyone plays, especially during this time right now, practice safety above anything else.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think there's just one other small incidental footnote to add to the story of the Sutro bass, and it's not really about the location itself, but it has to do with a descendant of the developer Adolf Sutro.
Yeah, it's really interesting because his grandson was also named Adolf Sutro,
right.
Adolf G. Sutro at the time.
Right.
There was a very popular missing persons case in the Grand Canyon in the 1920s. I think it was actually 1928. Ironically enough, it was in the Arizona part of the Grand Canyon.
Right.
A lot of things when our work brings us back to Arizona. But there was a disappearance of a couple named Glenn and Bessie Hyde. They had decided that they were going to, for the honeymoon, traverse the Grand Canyon with a homemade skiff or boat. They built them themselves. This is not during a time when people had guides to take you through the Grand Canyon.
There wasn't whitewater rafting.
No, this was not regulated at all. This was just, if you wanted to go through the Grand Canyon, you got yourself a boat and you went.
Exactly, and it was these, not that they were with a large group of people, it was just these two on their honeymoon. How much boating experience did they have even to go in? I'm not sure.
The husband had a tremendous amount, but his wife had none whatsoever.
But she was very hesitant about this trip.
Yeah, even towards the end, the last sighting of her, one of them was with a photographer that they met at one of their stops along the way. They had hiked to Bright Angel Trail out of the canyon to resupply for a few days. And at the South Rim, they approached a photographer, Emery Kolb, at his studio, and they got some photographs taken. That was the last time they were ever photographed or seen.
Right.
Was at this spot.
But who was the last person to see them?
Adolf G. Sutro. A lot of historians, even there was a Ken Burns documentary on PBS called National Parks: America's Best Idea.
Right.
And they mentioned it in here. That a lot of people saw the grandson of Adolf Sutro, who is also named Adolf G. Sutro, was seen in the boat with them in the skiff along one of their stops from Phantom Ranch to Hermit Rapid. That was the last time anyone saw them.
Exactly. Once
he got off at, Hermit Rapid, they were left, supposedly. Supposedly, quote unquote.
Right.
But a huge search was made by the husband's father, even before the couple was considered overdue, which was interesting because they hadn't been considered missing yet.
Right.
But he somehow had concern enough to go out and want to get a search party going.
And you have to wonder why.
Yeah.
And it's so different, obviously, in those days.
Yeah.
It's not like, he received a text from his son, saying that, so what it was that caused him to be concerned, I'm not sure that we would ever know. But, did they find the boat? They
found a camera, and they had one last photo found on the camera of the couples that revealed that they had made it to River Mile 165 on November 27th.
And that was it.
That was the last known sighting. The people theorized that they made it as far as River Mile 226, but they can't say for sure.
That's really interesting, too, because I've seen pictures of this boat that they built. This wasn't a small boat. This was a pretty big boat, and almost, to me, like a little cumbersome, really.
Yeah.
But still, it was a big thing. So for that to, not have any evidence of that left behind, that's really strange.
And there's no conclusive, evidence to say what exactly happened to them. That's the thing.
Right.
There's no evidence that they crashed and perished in the crash. There's no evidence that one of them did something to the other, or that someone did something to both of them. There's actually, because of the lack of evidence, a lot of legends and rumors have gone on over the years. In 1971, there was an elderly woman who was a commercial Grand Canyon rafting guide who all of a sudden to her guests made the claim that she herself was Bessie Hyde. Even though she was supposed to have gone missing in 1928.
And she went by a totally different name.
Yeah.
Well, that would make you wonder. I mean, if she were alive at that time, what happened to her husband?
Well, she claimed that she stabbed her husband because he was abusive.
Okay.
And then escaped the canyon on her own and just, left her life behind. But there's no evidence to support that whatsoever.
Right.
And this woman, I guess, was known to locals of the area to kind of make stories up a lot.
Okay.
So people just chalked it up to that she was just making up another story. But what's the truth?
That would be kind of the best way to confess to murder, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to believe you because they think that, you're just telling tall
The
tales.
boy cried wolf, man.
And there's no evidence either. And that many years later, there you go.
There's also another woman whose children found something interesting after her death. There's some speculation after the death of famed rafter Georgie Clark in May 1992 that she was really Bessie Hyde, because they found documents and a pistol found in her effects after her death. However, no conclusive evidence was ever found to make a claim one way or another.
Okay.
So, again, there's nothing concrete here. And again, this has nothing to do with the Sutro bass themselves.
No.
It's just an interesting side note that the grandson of the man who built these bass that seemed to have so much activity going on was the last person to see this couple who was never found again in the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon itself has a lot of stories with it too.
Oh gosh, of course.
That's a whole series, I think, of episodes you can go into, but
there's a lot you could speculate from it, but it's just a little interesting side note, I guess, to the history of Adolf Sutro.
Yeah.
Well, that is going to wrap up our episode on the Sutro baths. We encourage everyone to look them up.
We'll leave links down below for the research that we did do, so that you can read it yourself, and then you can send us anything you find yourself that you thought was interesting.
If you've been there, you have any stories to tell, we'd love to hear it. We always love to hear your stories. So give us a shout, give us a follow, share us, hit us up if you have something you want to share on our podcast. And as always, we thank you for listening. And next week, we have a couple things.
Yeah, first, we have a listener who contacted us that they are paranormal investigators, and they have a specific building they bought to investigate themselves and have opened up to other investigators. I believe it's in Minnesota, right?
I believe so.
We're not going to give you details yet, because we're actually going to be doing a phone interview with the person who contacted us, and we'll just share the interview with you here on the podcast in 2 weeks' time, hopefully.
Right.
That is our plan for episode 6, and we're not going to share the interview. We're going to go over the case itself after the interview, and then discuss what our thoughts are on it overall. This is a location we hope to visit after the quarantine is over and everyone's safe again. We'd love to come here and visit it ourselves.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting location.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing that over the next couple weeks, setting up the interview and getting that all settled. But next week's episode, we're deciding to take a step back from already established cases, and we're going to investigate pace of paranormal investigative technology.
Right.
Something we mentioned before, the spirit box. We're going to be doing a look into the spirit box, what it's used for primarily, some other uses investigators have found with it, and then we're going to do a spirit box session and a Gansfield experiment live here on our podcast. And we're also going to be recording it with videos so that you guys can go check it out on our Instagram and Facebook page.
Yep, and we will, talk about, their uses in the paranormal investigation field. It's been very interesting as we have started working with the Gansfield experiment.
Yeah.
And we will explain everything about what it is if you're not familiar with it. And it's kind of an eye-opening thing. And
we don't claim to be experts. We just started using the Gansfield experiment, and it's very interesting results so far. There's a lot more work to do with it, but it's something that we're interested in talking to you guys about. So
exactly. So again, we'll be back soon. Thank you all for continuing to listen, and we'll have more soon.
Keep an eye out. Always look for the strange and the unexplained. And we'll talk to you guys next week about Spirit Box.
All right, everyone. Good night.
Thanks. Good night, guys.